program is about to inspire them what to become the entrepreneur. When you are combine any active people with the different background and with different local wisdom, and they are joined together, they can form a new innovation.
Indonesia diramalkan akan menjadi negara besar 4 atau 5 dunia dalam 2035-40-45 dengan GDP kira-kira 12 triliun US dollar.
What is the one key problem that they have to solve it?
The biggest problem I see is the climate change. There's something you could do. From today on, stop using single-use plastic. It's the very highest contributor for pollution in the sea.
Jangan suka buang sampah, apalagi sampah plastik. Kalau mikroplastik itu dimakan ikan, ikan dimakan oleh manusia yang masih bisa melahirkan, hampir pasti bayinya ibu itu cacat atau stunting. Ayo kita kerjasama, kita bangun Indonesia, kita punya presiden seperti Joko Widodo yang bekerja dengan hati, dia hanya memikirkan apa yang terbaik buat Indonesia.
The world is starting to wake up that we have long known, that without our precious environment, none of us have a future.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you, the land of coconut tree, land of smiling people.
The main question is not about the total quantity. Our focus is to remain as a prime destination, high-end consumers. We got only 1,200 islands. You got 17,000. Can you imagine the potential of Indonesia for tourism industry if you plan something like what we have?
We have a program, we call it the Seribu Startup. Program is about to inspire them what to become the entrepreneur. When you are combine any active people with the different background and with different local wisdom, and they are joined together, they can form a new innovation.
Indonesia diramalkan akan menjadi negara besar 4 atau 5 dunia dalam 2035-40-45 dengan GDP kira-kira 12 triliun US dollar.
What is the one key problem that they have to solve it?
The biggest problem I see is the climate change. There's something you could do. From today on, stop using single-use plastic. It's the very highest contributor for pollution in the sea.
Jangan suka buang sampah, apalagi sampah plastik. Kalau mikroplastik itu dimakan ikan, ikan dimakan oleh manusia yang masih bisa melahirkan, hampir pasti bayinya ibu itu cacat atau stunting. Ayo kita kerjasama, kita bangun Indonesia, kita punya presiden seperti Joko Widodo yang bekerja dengan hati, dia hanya memikirkan apa yang terbaik buat Indonesia.
The world is starting to wake up that we have long known, that without our precious environment, none of us have a future.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you, the land of coconut tree, land of smiling people.
The main question is not about the total quantity. Our focus is to remain as a prime destination, high-end consumers. We got only 1,200 islands. You got 17,000. Can you imagine the potential of Indonesia for tourism industry if you plan something like what we have?
We have a program, we call it the Seribu Startup. Program is about to inspire them what to become the entrepreneur. When you are combine any ethnic people with the different background and with different local wisdom, and they are joined together, they can form a new innovation.
Indonesia diramalkan akan menjadi negara besar 4 atau 5 dunia dalam 2035-40-45 dengan GDP kira-kira 12 triliun US dollar.
What is the one key problem that they have to solve it?
The biggest problem I see is the climate change. There's something you could do. From today on, stop using single-use plastic. It's the very highest contributor for pollution in the sea.
Jangan suka buang sampah, apalagi sampah plastik. Kalau mikroplastik itu dimakan ikan dimakan oleh manusia yang masih bisa melahirkan, hampir pasti bayinya ibu itu cacat atau stunting. Ayo kita kerjasama, kita bangun Indonesia, kita punya presiden seperti Joko Widodo yang bekerja dengan hati, dia hanya memikirkan apa yang terbaik buat Indonesia.
The world is starting to wake up that we have long known, that without our precious environment, none of us have a future.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you, the land of coconut tree, land of smiling people.
The main main question is not about the total quantity. Our focus is to remain as a prime destination, high-end consumers. We got only 1,200 islands. You got 17,000. Can you imagine the potential of Indonesia for tourism industry if you plan something like what we have?
We have a program, we call it the Seribu Startup. Program is about to inspire them what to become the entrepreneur. When you are combine any active people with the different background and with different local wisdom, and they are joined together, they can form a new innovation.
Indonesia diramalkan akan menjadi negara besar 4 atau 5 dunia dalam 2035-40-45 dengan GDP kira-kira 12 triliun US dollar.
What is the one key problem that they have to solve it?
The biggest problem I see is the climate change. There's something you could do. From today on, stop using single-use plastic. It's the very highest contributor for pollution in the sea.
Jangan suka buang sampah, apalagi sampah plastik. Kalau mikroplastik itu dimakan ikan, ikan dimakan oleh manusia yang masih bisa melahirkan, hampir pasti bayinya ibu itu cacat atau stunting. Ayo kita kerjasama, kita bangun Indonesia, kita punya presiden seperti Joko Widodo yang bekerja dengan hati, dia hanya memikirkan apa yang terbaik buat Indonesia.
The world is starting to wake up that we have long known, that without our precious environment, none of us have a future.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you, the land of coconut tree, land of smiling people.
The main question is not about the total quantity. Our focus is to remain as a prime destination, high-end consumers. We got only 1,200 islands. You got 17,000. Can you imagine the potential of Indonesia for tourism industry if you plan something like what we have?
We have a program, we call it the Seribu Startup. Program is about to inspire them what to become the entrepreneur. When you are combine any active people with the different background and with different local wisdom, and they are joined together, they can form a new innovation.
Indonesia diramalkan akan menjadi negara besar 4 atau 5 dunia dalam 2035-40-45 dengan GDP kira-kira 12 triliun US dollar.
What is the one key problem that they have to solve it?
The biggest problem I see is the climate change. There's something you could do. From today on, stop using single-use plastic. It's the very highest contributor for pollution in the sea.
Jangan suka buang sampah, apalagi sampah plastik. Kalau mikroplastik itu dimakan ikan dimakan oleh manusia yang masih bisa melahirkan, hampir pasti bayinya ibu itu cacat atau stunting. Ayo kita kerjasama, kita bangun Indonesia, kita punya presiden seperti Joko Widodo yang bekerja dengan hati, dia hanya memikirkan apa yang terbaik buat Indonesia.
The world is starting to wake up that we have long known, that without our precious environment, none of us have a future.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you, the land of coconut tree, land of smiling people.
The main question is not about the total quantity. Our focus is to remain as a prime destination, high-end consumers. We got only 1,200 islands. You got 17,000. Can you imagine the potential of Indonesia for tourism industry if you plan something like what we have?
We have a program, we call it the Seribu Startup. Program is about to inspire them what to become the entrepreneur. When you are combined any active people with a different background and with different local wisdom, and they are joined together, they can form a new innovation.
Indonesia diramalkan akan menjadi negara besar 4 atau 5 dunia dalam 2035-40-45 dengan GDP kira-kira 12 triliun US dollar.
What is the one key problem that they have to solve it?
The biggest problem I see is the climate change. There's something you could do. From today on, stop using single-use plastic. It's the very highest contributor for pollution in the sea.
Jangan suka buang sampah, apalagi sampah plastik. Kalau mikroplastik itu dimakan ikan dimakan oleh manusia yang masih bisa melahirkan, hampir pasti bayinya ibu itu cacat atau stunting. Ayo kita kerjasama, kita bangun Indonesia, kita punya presiden seperti Joko Widodo yang bekerja dengan hati, dia hanya memikirkan apa yang terbaik buat Indonesia.
The world is starting to wake up that we have long known, that without our precious environment, none of us have a future.
ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you, the land of coconut tree, land of smiling people.
The main question is not about the total quantity. Our focus is to remain as a prime destination, high-end consumers. We got only 1,200 islands. You got 17,000. Can you imagine the potential of Indonesia for tourism industry if you plan something like what we have?
We have a program, we call it the Seribu Startup. Program is about to inspire them what to become the entrepreneur. When you are combined any active people with a different background and with different local wisdom, and they are joined together, they can form a new innovation.
Indonesia diramalkan akan menjadi negara besar 4 atau 5 dunia dalam 2035-4045 dengan GDP kira-kira 12 triliun US dollar.
Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, Your Excellency, Pak Hafaz. Good afternoon, Dr. Niloufar. Okay. Could you hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We will get started this session next 15 minutes, and there is something that I'd like to share with you. We will get started by 2, and there will be opening remarks by me, and then continue by the AIS. It's about 10 minutes, and right after that, I will let the speaker to present their lectures, and before that, I will introduce Pak Hafaz and also Dr. Niloufar to the attendees. And also I will maybe mentioning your curriculum vitae only in brief. Yeah. Then after that, after 20 minutes of each speaker, we will have questions and answer sessions. It will last about 40 minutes. And there will be 2 kinds of question and answer. The first one is through the chat box that they can type. All attendees can type any questions before the presentation begin. And the second one is question and answer through live Q&A. And it seems like I will give only 2 or 3 attendees for this. Okay, very good. Okay, is there something that you would like to remark? No?
No, it's okay.
No, okay. I hope everything's going to be okay, Pak.
I hope so too.
Yeah.
I'm sure it will.
Yeah, it seems like everybody is very curious to know about this lecture. So I see from the YouTube, yeah, there is growing number of attendees.
Oh, so
Yeah.
I only see from here. Oh, YouTube. So they're really coming in from there. Oh dear.
Yeah, we are on YouTube. Yeah, in a couple of minutes, and I
I
hope
better make sure
everything's-
not to make faces.
Yeah, everybody is very excited. Yeah, to join this
Yeah.
webinar.
I know it's all because of Ambassador Havas. That's why.
Yeah. Yeah, if I was not mistaken, last week you were on FPCI, yeah, Ambassador Hafaz. Yeah, it was very interesting, and most of my students were joining that FBCI, and they said, well, it's very interesting, and they really love to do some research, yeah, on this topics. Okay.
As probably as Nilu also is aware, the current generations are not too interested in the law of the sea or ocean issues. So I think this kind of activities will help a lot of people across the region and the world on the importance of the oceans, the importance of studying. Actually, it's not studying just law of the sea, but also ocean policy. So it's both ocean policy and law of the sea. It becomes together today. So you will see
exactly
legal aspect, political aspect.
Yeah.
So I think it's important in a holistic view.
Yeah,
very much so. I think it is important. There should be more of an interest in the younger generation for these issues, considering how much of our world is covered by the ocean. So,
yeah, absolutely. Okay, we will get started by 10 minutes to go. Okay.
And by the way, I'm using a background of a beach, Nilu. It's called the Pink Beach. This is not Photoshopped. This is a real beach with a certain sand, and it becomes, the color is pinkish.
I was going to ask, yeah, it's beautiful.
Okay, Pak Hafaz and Dr. Nilofer, it seems like it is getting started because there is a recording process. Now we jump to open the session. Okay, are you ready?
Yeah.
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Okay, we get started with this. I believe that the participant number is 102 people attend this. Okay. Yeah, we get started with this. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very pleased to be here today, and welcome to Ambassador Lecture Series 1, Environmental Security, Sea Level Rise and Sovereignty Boundaries Issues Due to Climate Change Impact. I'm Fiani Puspitasari, the faculty members of Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Padjadjaran University, and researcher at Center for Security and International Studies, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Padjadjaran University. And I'm the moderator of this forum today. Thank you so much for joining this webinar, an event conducted by Archipelagic and Island States Forum, United Nations Development Program, in collaboration with Center for Security and International Studies, Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, Universitas Padjadjaran Bandung. A warm welcome and gratitude is extended to our distinguished speaker, His Excellency Dr. Arif Hafaz Ugroseno and Professor Dr. Nilofer Oral, and also to Mr. Isaac Reyes, Charge d'Affaires of the Fiji Embassy in Indonesia, and also to Pacific Island Development Forum and Coordinating Ministry of Maritime Affairs and Investment of Republic of Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, we are very fortunate to have two distinguished and prominent speakers who will deliver lectures on sea level rise based on their expertise and perspectives. The first speaker is His Excellency Dr. Arif Hafaz Ugroseno, the Ambassador of Republic of Indonesia to the Federal Republic of Germany. And we also have Professor Dr. Nilofer Oral, the Director of Center for International Law, National University of Singapore. All right. Before we get started this forum, let us hear a brief introduction of Archipelagic and Island States Forum United Nations Development Program that will be delivered by AIS Secretariat. AIS Secretariat, please welcome.
Thank you, Ibu Fiani. Let me just share my screen real quick. I hope now everyone can see my screen. Good afternoon, Your Excellency and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a true pleasure for me to welcome you at the Archipelagic and Island States Forum Ambassadorial Lecture, this time in collaboration with UNPAD. First of all, let me convey my gratitude to His Excellency Ambassador Hafaz Ugroseno, the Indonesian ambassador to the Federal Republic of Germany, for willing to spend your time to share your knowledge. I also would like to thank Dr. Nilüfer Oral, the director of the Center for International Law at the National University of Singapore, for joining us today. And I also like to give my appreciation to Pajajaran University for supporting this event, and hopefully many more of our programs in the future. So let me briefly introduce you the Archipelagic and Island States Forum and highlighted some of our activities and upcoming events. The Archipelagic and Island States Forum is a platform designed to include 47 archipelagic and island states around the world to identify and work together to come up with a concrete collaboration and partnership in addressing the common challenges faced by island countries. Now, in doing that, we focus on 4 main areas, which is climate change mitigation and adaptation, blue economy, marine plastic debris, and good maritime governance. Our journey starts from a sideline discussion in 2017, and that meeting was then followed by a series of ministerial meetings in 2018 and 19, in which archipelagic and island countries around the world agreed to establish ICE Forum and then later the Secretariat to run the daily activities and programs of the forum. And of course, none of this would have been possible without the contribution and leadership of Ambassador Hafaz as one of the key people who established the foundation of ICE Forum in the early days, and we are deeply grateful for that. We have 4 objectives, which in summary, we're trying to foster collaboration among archipelagic and island countries and enable innovation through our strong emphasis in R&D and entrepreneurship and international cooperation. We want to facilitate research, particularly the applied ones, around the 4 focus areas through our joint research program. And we also want to invest in human capital development through our scholarship program. All of these initiatives are to discover prototype solutions that can be scaled up and new entrepreneurs that we can nurture and develop in our entrepreneurship-related programs. We support early stage entrepreneurs through our Startup Hub, where we work with incubators and investors from all over ICE countries. And we're also developing the Blue Financing Framework to finance and help grow sustainable blue businesses and SMEs. Finally, we believe that by working together with government authorities, academics, civil societies, and other relevant stakeholders in ICE countries, in discovering smart and innovative solutions is the key to enhance the resiliency of island countries and its people to live in an environment that has become more and more challenging today. And that is all about ICE Forum in general. And now I would like to announce several upcoming events that we have. Next week on Wednesday, 10th of June at 10 a.m. Jakarta time, we will have a program launching and talk show on fostering collaboration for resilient island economies, where we will discuss the importance of global cooperation to allow innovation and entrepreneurship to flourish, and how that can enhance our resiliency as an archipelagic and island country. If you have not registered, please do so. I encourage you. As you can see, we will have prominent guests and speakers who will attend the event. We'll also have an upcoming event as well. It is the ICE Innovation Challenge. It is a 2-round business competition where we are trying to discover early stage startups with an MVP or service that would help the business community or society at large to become stronger, especially during the crisis such as the current pandemic. Now I'll stop there and we can move on to the main event. I hope all of you will enjoy this lecture, and I believe that we can gain something from it and we can start our action to improve our environment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mas Ahmad. Well, attendees, ladies and gentlemen, now let's turn to our main session, the lectures presented by Dr. Arif Hafaz Ugroseno and Professor Dr. Niloufar Oral. And before that, I'd like to read their brief curriculum vitae started from His Excellency Pak Hafaz. His Excellency Arif Hafaz Ugroseno was born on 12 March 1963. His educational background is from Harvard Law School from 1991 to 1992, Harvard Institute for International Development in 1990, and Faculty of Law, Universitas Diponegoro in 1986. He is currently the Ambassador of Republic of Indonesia to the Federal Republic of Germany. He was the Ambassador of Republic of Indonesia for Belgium, Luxembourg, and European Union from 2010 to 2015, and he was the President of UN International Law of the Sea from 2010 to 2011. Beforehand, he was the chief negotiator for boundary treaties, MLA treaty, security treaty between our Republic of Indonesia and Australia, and resolution of World Ocean Conference Manado in 2009. For details of his vita, you can click the link provided on your chat box. And today, His Excellency Dr. Hafaz is presenting the lecture entitled The Foreign Policy of the Republic of Indonesia and Responding the Sea Level Rise, which affects the sovereignty boundaries. And for all attendees, please feel free to type your questions or inquiry in the chat box below before the session begins, because after this, it will be closed. And ladies and gentlemen, another prominent speaker we have today is Professor Dr. Niloufar Oral. She is currently the Director of Center for International Law, National University of Singapore. And Dr. Oral has over 20 years of experience in the study, teaching, and practice of international law. She has been a member of the law faculty at Istanbul Bilgi University since 1998. In 2016, she was elected by the UN General Assembly to the International Law Commission, where she is co-chair of the study group on sea level rise in relation to international law. And she has been nominated by Turkey to the International Law Commission from 2022 to 2027, and she has advised the Foreign Ministry of Republic of Turkey on matters related to the law of the sea and climate change, and served as the climate change negotiator between 2009 and 2016, and attended meetings held by the International Maritime Organization. She has also before the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. And for details of her curriculum vitae, you can click the link provided on your chat box. And today, Dr. Oral is presenting the lecture entitled The Sea Level Rises and Sovereignty Boundaries Issued Through the International Law Lenses. Attendees, ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome His Excellency Dr. Arif Hafaz Ugroseno, and you may have the floor.
Thank you, Fian, and good afternoon, Nilu. Long time no see. We are supposed to see each other in the Rhodes Academy, but because of the COVID, we have to cancel that. So my presentation will start with a small video, 2 minutes maximum, and then I'll have 1 page piece of presentations, and then after that we will go into discussion. So let me go to the video. Hang on a second. There you go. Is it on?
Yes.
ada kelihatan orang. At night, we only see water and garbage, nothing else. That is very scary.
His neighbors have all fled. His neighbors have all fled. Their house is destroyed by the wind.
Is the archipelago nation of Indonesia, with 10% of its current population living within 6 meters of sea level.
Ombak kembali menerjang pantai Suwuk ya pagi ini ya sampai naik paping lur ya itu dia ombaknya sampai naik ke paping-paping. Warung-warung rusak pagi ini dibantam ombak di pantai Suwuknya.
Ratusan hektar sawah di Suwuk terancam gagal panen karena terkena air rob.
So there was a small video about the rising of sea level in Indonesia in the northern part of Java and also in the southern part of Java. We believe that the challenge of the rising sea level is also being faced by large archipelagic state like Indonesia. So it's not only a problem of small island states, but it's also, I believe, a problem of many countries that has coast. And that is the reason why, in the first place, that we have the idea of bringing together the small island states and archipelagic states, because this challenge that all the island states have together, whether you are small or big, whether you are in the Pacific or in Asia or even in Europe, like the UK or Japan, you have this particular problem that you face. So I think by bringing all the ability and resources and capacity of the island states, archipelagic or non-archipelagic, small and big, we will be able then to pool this knowledge and resources to be able to mount a correct policy response for all of us to deal with this matter. So I'm really glad that IES was established with the cooperation of UNDP, and I think we are starting to work in something really great policy in the future. Now, I understand that Professor Oral Nilu is a member of the ILC, who is also having a new mandate in discussing the sovereignty issue and legal issue on the rising of sea level. So she will explain that in her presentations. I will give you one-page presentations, and it just gives us a general overall view, not too deep, about the impact of the rising sea level and sovereignty issue, especially relations to us in Indonesia and other archipelagic countries. So I will share with you my presentation. It's rather unique, probably. Hang on a second. Can you see this? It's my hand drawing. So I will start with this part. Okay. This is basically a drawing to show that this is the base point of a country. And this is the projections to the ocean, territorial waters, contiguous zone, EEZ, continental shelf. There's very few fish here, just 2 fishes here. And we see this is the base point. And on the second picture, you see that the rising of sea level go all the way to the coast, and the base point is being flooded or inundated. And the questions are abound. So we have a couple of legal implications here. And the first one is the baselines of the country. Are they going to move inward or not? So this is one big issue. Because if you move inward your baselines, then your maritime zone could also be impacted. Would that mean, like in this picture, your territorial waters go inside, inward? So you mean you lost sovereignty? Would that mean your contiguous zone also move inward? Your EEZ also move inward, and everything move inward? So it is it's a legal question that we have to see. Okay. And what about the legal status of the boundaries that a country have delimited? Okay, for instance, if we have these situations in the Straits of Malacca, and we have already maritime boundaries with Malaysia, the continental shelf, does that mean we need to change the boundary that we signed in 1969, for instance? What if the base point or baseline that is affected, it's located in the southern part of Java Island? And we know that there are a number of base points and baselines in the southern part of Java that were used by us to determine the maritime boundaries with Australia. Does that mean the treaty that we signed with Australia needs to be renegotiated? Does that mean we have to move back? So this is all the legal issue that we face as Indonesia itself. Because if you look at Indonesia, we are the largest archipelagic countries, not only in the world, especially in our region. And we are probably the only one in our region that has more neighbors in terms of maritime boundaries. We have India, we have Thailand, we have Malaysia, Singapore, Vietnam, the Philippines, even Palau, we have PNG, Timor-Leste, and Australia. We have 10. Okay. If you look at other countries, probably they have maybe less than 5, but we are quite expansive, and that's why the issue of the rising sea levels, it's very relevant for Indonesian policymakers, Indonesian academics as well, to have a look at it on different aspects of it. In other countries, the rising of sea level may remove the whole islands together, okay, so that will impact the statehood of the states, okay. Although in some of my academic discussions, the rising of sea level in South China Sea may be good, because then you will remove the islands and there will be no more dispute. But let's see. Okay. And then the last would be the legal, political, socio-economic impacts of the people in the area that is impacted. Like in other countries, I know in the Bay of Bengals, people are being relocated. I think in PNG also, there's one island, I don't remember which one, Carteret, I think. And of course, also the case in the Bedono village in the northern part of Central Java, you see in the video. They were relocated in different places. And of course, the relocations require many different elements, the entitlements of the land, ownership of the land, and then also the question of if at some point in the future, possibly, there was or there will be a phenomenon where the lands came up again. Is the land title still remain the same, for instance? What are other economic rights and social rights of those who have been relocated? So there's a lot of complicated legal, political issue for those affected people on the coast that needs to be relocated. So the legal implications of the rising sea level is not only about base point and baselines or maritime zones, but even you go as far as the status of a country and the human rights of the affected people. So it's a very complex issues, and I believe, as far as I know, up to date in Indonesia, we have not had any particular study in depth on the legal implications of the rising of sea level. I know there are some local leaders in Indonesia who work with foreign countries. I know the province of Central Java is working with experts from the Netherlands on this particular aspect, but it's more on this geographical aspect and not exactly on the legal implication. So this is one big issue that we need to look at it very, very carefully. Now, what are the possible response of these implications, of legal implications of the rising sea level? I divide them into two, geographicals and legal. The geographical aspect, relates to us as human beings. When we have threats, we either run away, we flight, or we fight it. So either flight or fight. So flight in this regard is relocations, as I mentioned to you. You do a proper relocations, you do analysis of the legal rights, the political, economic, and social rights of the people to be relocated, and you have to choose the place. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of policy issue involved, but this has been done in different parts of the world, and we have done it ourselves as well. The second is to fight it. To fight it with what? With coastal defense, with dam, we build reclamations. Probably this is what we are fighting in Jakarta, coastal defense. Other countries are doing coastal defense as well in different ways. Either you have a very huge dam and dikes and complex water systems, or you do reclamations like in Maldives, for instance, but there's always some negative impact of the coastal defenses. Sometimes they're not necessarily environmentally friendly, they create other ecological issue, but then it is a policy issue of the local government and central government, wherever they are, on which right balance to take when you are fighting the rising sea level. So this is one aspect that are very particularly important in the adaptations of climate change. However, as you are well aware, the Paris Agreement itself does not say anything about ocean. Ocean is just one word in the Paris Agreement Treaty, and it's not in the operative word. And as a result, many of the commitment of countries, they are not including oceans. And as Nilu mentioned, 2/3 of our planet is water, but the Paris Agreement does not seem to have a comprehensive approach on that. So this is something that not only us and the region, but also global community need to look at it in a much more comprehensive way. So the second part of the thinking of possible response is the legal aspect. The legal aspect, there are two. which is first in the aspect of the baseline, and the second is the aspect of the outer limit. So on the baseline aspect, there are some articles in the convention that people can have a look. And one of them is Article 5 of the Convention of Law of the Sea, which specifically mentioned that the normal baseline is basically low water line along the coast, and they have to be charted in the large-scale charts, and the large-scale charts need to be charts that are officially recognized by coastal states. So it's a very interesting wordings here. Recognition by your own country on your own charts. In practice, you can choose your own chart, which may not necessarily be updated. You can submit in the UN, and you can use that. The use of old chart is not really strange, I'm telling you, because when I was negotiating a maritime boundary with my colleague from Singapore, we agreed to use the old Singapore chart of before the reclamations. So it is possible to do that. So I have no idea with other state practice, but at least for Indonesia, we have done this particular aspect. So you can use legal aspect in fixing, quote unquote, your baseline, because as a matter of fact, although you have a problem of rising sea levels, at some locations, not all the coasts are being used as a base point, like only some part. If the some part is okay, then you can still use some part of the ocean, of the coast. The same with Indonesia as archipelagic state. Under specific chapter on archipelagic state under the UNCLOS, we are mandated by the convention to be able to use only specific parts of the coast to draw a straight baseline. But this is one way, legal aspect in trying to fix your position. This is idea come from different experts. It is not yet fixed on the stone, and I hope that when the ILC and came up with this in the future, maybe Nilu can tell us, what's happening there. And another way is to fix the outer limit. So as I mentioned before, the status of the boundaries that has been delimited. Okay, so we can use, of course, the argument, an old argument, basically that the boundary treaty is the only treaty that cannot be removed because of new circumstances, and it's there in the Vienna Conventions of the treaty, and it's there also 1969. And it's also in the Vienna Convention 1978. So it's a element in international law that we can use to fix the outer limit. So once the outer limit is fixed, then regardless of the situations in the coastline, we will then be able to have a fixed limit. But we have also challenges. For instance, we have a fixed boundary with Australia in the Indian Ocean, okay? And if we have rising of sea level, for instance, in Sumatra, and if we are going to submit our extended continental shelf, then the CLCS positions today is not very clear, whether they are going to use the actual coastline that is being flooded, or they're going to use the chart. So this is also still an open question. So, and of course, we still have the ongoing discussions of BBNJ, the biodiversity beyond national jurisdictions, and where the BBNJ will be measured from. Is it going to be measured from Article 5 or Article 47 of the convention, which is the chart recognized by state, or is it going to be recognized or measured from the actual coastline? So this is still an open question. Now, the last part that I want to discuss with you, this is the biggest challenge of the small island states, is the question of statehood. Okay, so imagine if your country is completely flooded, then you have to move to different parts of the world. Then the legal question is that is your country legally exists? Because under international law, of course, requirement of country, number one is territory. Then, of course, the government, the people, and independence. This is some being argued. But can you have a country without territory? So this is also something that countries need to look at it. The UN and probably the ILC as well for the future considerations. I mean, in the past, you have for a couple of decades, probably, if memory serves me right, Vatican was a country without a territory as such. And you have Palestine, but Palestine have territory, but it's occupied territory. Maybe there are some examples. Probably Nilu can jump in on this later on. But we need to think through the innovation of law is very important. Okay, if we go back a little bit, there was no EEZ regime under the old law of the sea. There was no contiguous zone. There was no archipelagic waters. And after negotiation, we have all those new principles of law included in the convention. So I think due to the fact that we have a new situation that was not there in the past, the climate change challenges, the rising of sea level. So the issue of statehood without territory is something that international lawyers should look at it. So this is I would say the most difficult issue that is being faced by smaller islands, especially in the Pacific, and also probably even in the East African country in the Indian Ocean. So,
Your Excellency, the time is up. Yeah, unfortunately, the time is over. Yeah. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
I hope that
Okay.
Nilu can continue the discussions, and looking forward for the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And attendees, ladies and gentlemen, now it's the turn of Professor Niloufar Oral. Please welcome.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'm delighted to be here, and I thank the organizers very much for this invitation. And I'm particularly privileged and pleased to be sharing the stage with my dear friend, Ambassador Havas, who I had the pleasure of knowing for many years. And I have to say, he is definitely a leading and guiding name for many of us in law of the sea. And so I thank him very much for setting the stage. And I didn't know he was such a talented drawer. I'm afraid I don't have such talent, so I had to use a PowerPoint. But I appreciate the innovation. And I thank everyone who is attending this. There's no doubt this is such a critical issue. It's a very real issue. And I appreciated the video because I think we have to also always remember it's a human issue as well. People are being impacted as we speak, and unfortunately, they're going to continue to be impacted. So this is a problem that started a long time ago, and I fear we're going to be suffering it for some time. States need to take aggressive action. And one of the impacts, hold on. All right. So just a little bit quick background to this, and you already had the visual, very striking video by Ambassador Havas. But in fact, the Earth is mostly water. 71% of the Earth is ocean. Now, another important point is that around 10% of the land is covered by glaciers or ice. And this is important for sea level rise because we know, without doubt, temperature is rising. And as a result of the rise in temperature, glaciers are melting and ice sheets. And one of the unexpected and perhaps the most dangerous concern, the Antarctic ice sheets. And also because of the warming ocean, and they are warming, we have thermal expansion. All this together is the perfect storm for sea level rise. Now, there's a lot of science on this, and I'm certainly not a scientist, but the average, and this is only an average, and in my view, probably a conservative average, that by the end of the century, we can see sea level rise up to 1.1 meters. But certain regions like this region, the South Pacific region, are going to experience much more. And then you add on top of that the hundreds of millions of people that live near the coast, particularly vulnerable, low-lying coastal areas. This region in particular, we are in a very vulnerable region. And then, of course, the small island developing states who really face existential threats because they have limited territorial space, and it is disappearing. So this is the background. And I don't have a video, but I thought I could put in some photos. This is Greenland. Again, these are the canaries in the coal mine, as we call them, Solomon Islands. People are, this is what's happening. And we are losing islands as we speak. All right. Now, I'm also going to probably go over what Ambassador Havas has talked about, but maybe in a little bit more detail, because this is the international law context. What is key? We're looking at maritime boundaries and the entitlements that come with it. So, sea level rise. One, and I think the ambassador has given us a nice overview, that how it may impact and change our boundaries and therefore the entitlements. Then we also have the problem of what happens with islands, not only loss of statehood, but if they become under international law rocks, and I'll go into more detail about that. And of course, the loss of statehood issues. Now, maritime boundaries can be established different ways. I think Ambassador Havas gave a number of examples of those that are agreed to by treaty. Also, there are a number of them that go to international courts and tribunals. They're adjudicated. And then, of course, if there's no overlap, you have coastal states that can declare their boundaries. And if they're unopposed, we have set maritime boundaries. Now, to give a better idea, and some of you may already know this, but again, to put the context, it's very important. Why is it so important that, well, okay, so what happens if it moves? Why is that important? That, as Ambassador Havas explained, all right, so we go a little landward. Well, it is very important. Why? Because each maritime zone has a different legal regime. The territorial sea means a coastal state has sovereignty, with the one exception that foreign flagged ships have non-innocent passage rights. Right? So this means that the coastal state has what we call prescriptive enforcement powers, very important. Now, right now I'm talking about the water column. Then we go out into that zone that was created under the Law of the Sea Convention, up to 200 nautical miles, the exclusive economic zone. This didn't exist before. It is such a valuable zone. Here, the coastal state has exclusive sovereign rights for exploring, exploiting, conserving, managing, living and non-living resources. Right? For Indonesia, I know the fisheries resources. So many countries depend on fisheries. The whole reason we have an exclusive economic zone is because foreign flagged ships, distant fishing vessels were coming into coastal areas. So to protect the coastal interests, we have this. Now, imagine that shifts. What happens? Well, then the next zone is the high seas. That is an open access zone. Right? Now, the coastal state no longer has that exclusive right to conserve, to manage, to legislate, to regulate. It belongs now to other states. Even navigational rights become impacted because in the territorial sea suddenly becomes part of the exclusive economic zone. The third states will benefit because instead of innocent passage, they will have what's a version of high seas passage, not exactly, because there are certain rights that do come with the exclusive economic zone. And then, of course, you have the continental shelf, seabed and subsoil. Again, I mean, a lot of the disputes are about the resources in the continental shelf, offshore oil and gas, but there are other minerals as well. Now, the continental shelf, the coastal states up to 200 nautical mile, pretty well, I mean, you know, that's the given. Then there's that additional that could extend a continental shelf, that if you meet all kinds of criteria, and Ambassador Havas talked about the Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf, go up to 300 nautical miles. And then what's after that is the area, is the common heritage of mankind, completely different regime. So bottom line is that a shifting of that baseline is not a simple matter. It means that that will change legal regimes, and that brings certain economic costs as well, brings uncertainties. Think of all those fisheries agreements. I mean, I can go on and on. We have limited time, so I'm going to limit myself. And I think Ambassador Havas explained very well the importance of that baseline. And often these baselines are built on very ephemeral base points, you know, so little island features that disappear. Eroding coastal, I know Indonesia is also lots of coastal erosion. So the big question is, what happens to that baseline? And again, I'm going to be repeating, but perhaps going a little bit more detail, because these are the critical questions that international law has to answer. Archipelagos, this again, and Indonesia, one of the leading countries for establishing this new zone, didn't exist before the Law of the Sea Convention. So an archipelagic state like Indonesia, it's a complicated formula. I'm sure Ambassador Havas knows it much better than I do. But bottom line is, if you meet that formula, you get the great benefit of drawing this archipelagic baseline around your islands, and the inside of that is archipelagic waters, and you get sovereignty. Before that was actually open sea access, right? Now, it could be that because of sea level rise, you lose an island or two, and suddenly that formula doesn't work. What happens? These are very important issues, and they are really, I mean, the impacts, the consequences are monumental. So basically, at the end of the day, if we are talking about shifting and changes, are we creating legal and economic uncertainty? This is the big issue. Now, islands, I want to talk a little bit about islands. Again, so what's an island? And it's not, there's the famous poems, but we look to the Law of the Sea Convention and international law, and it says, okay, has to be naturally formed and is above water at high tide. Except there's another element, because you could also be a rock. And the difference is this: a full-fledged island, and it's regardless of size. Size is not the determining factor. A little island, if it meets the criteria, can have all the maritime zones, right? And that's the law. But if that island cannot sustain human habitation or an economic life of its own, and that's under the convention, then it is not entitled to an exclusive economic zone or a continental shelf. And those are the most valuable zones. Now, to be quite honest, what does that mean exactly? We have only one case that has addressed it. It's the South China Sea case. Most other cases, the courts have kind of declined to really address what that means, that definition. The problem is this: if an island that right now sustains human habitation, people live on it, it's a community, no question it's an island, but sea level rise brings much harm, brings salt water into fresh water, okay? That's salt water infusion. And now there's no drinkable water. As we see in the photos, what happens if those palm trees can no longer survive? What happens if they can no longer grow food? That means now the island is inhabitable. Does that mean that that island becomes a rock? These are all the key questions for international law. And I'm going to tell you, there are no clear answers on this. We already talked about, so how do we respond? We talked about the artificial adaptation measures, very expensive though, cost a lot, and they may not be permanent. Artificial island, you'd be amazed. Right now, this is a big growing industry. Floating cities. Maldives is already building its new capital on artificial island. But again, these are mega projects, they're very expensive, and I'm not even getting to environmental impact issues. Of course, the mangroves, Indonesia does this. I actually went to Indonesia and had the great pleasure of planting a mangrove. So it's ecosystem-based adaptation measure, and certainly encourage that, but it's not always gonna work. So what are the legal responses? And for me, I look at, we talk about adaptation to climate change, looking at these hard, mangroves and whatever, but what about legal adaptation? Why shouldn't our laws adapt? International law should also adapt to climate change and sea level rise. And this is where we come down to the issue, and Ambassador Havas explained to us, there are two views. Is that baseline ambulatory, or does international law allow it to be permanent and fixed? Now, when we look at the Law of the Sea Convention, it really does not directly answer that question. It's interpretation, because there are different provisions. You have one provision like Article 7. This is for straight baselines, not for the low water line. Or if it's a straight baseline drawn in an area, a coastal area that's highly unstable, and there's a regression, what it says is that, notwithstanding subsequent regression of the low water line, the straight baseline shall remain effective until changed by the coastal state. Does the coastal state have to change it? Or is this discretionary? Does the coastal state have to be monitoring? But again, this is for one specific area. On the other hand, we have express reference to permanency. And this has to do with the extended continental shelf, or the outer limits of the continental shelf. And here it's where, after the report comes back from the Commission on the continental limits of the continental shelf, that on the basis of these recommendations, the final outer limits shall be final and binding, so permanence. So these are examples. But so the question then, and this is an issue for many states, and we're talking a little bit about the International Law Commission. We have been examining statements by states concerning our project. And a key issue for our states is stability, security, predictability, and certainty. And so what we see that for existing boundaries, you mentioned, Ambassador Havas, the Vienna Conventions, relating, it doesn't say maritime boundaries, but certainly the question of, well, is sea level rise a change of circumstance that would require or justify a change in the boundaries? For land boundaries, no. We know that in succession of states, no. We also have two important cases, but the most recent one is the arbitral tribunal, Bay of Bengal, Bangladesh versus India. And here, the court specifically made reference to that land, like maritime delimitations, like land boundaries must be stable and definitive. And the tribunal also expressly said climate change nor its possible effects are not, or cannot jeopardize a large number of settled maritime boundaries throughout the world, right? So we have this. Now, there have been, at the international level, studies undertaken. The International Law Association, their Committee on Baselines, they studied baselines in general, but they realized that sea level rise was going to have an impact. They took the view that baselines are ambulatory. This is a view, it's an interpretation. Then they established the International Law Association Committee on Sea Level Rise. And they did it, and they're looking at the different issues from maritime boundaries. Also, we have to look at displacement of persons and also the loss of statehood. But for the boundaries, they recommended that boundaries should be fixed, actually, right? Again, for legal certainty and stability. Now, I'm a member of the International Law Commission. We have just finished our report. It is not yet public, so that is why I'm not speaking about the details. It is in progress, and we are looking at 3 issues. One, the law of the sea issue. So the first report now will come out. My co-chair is Foreign Minister of Romania, Bogdan Orescu. And we looked at all these issues in great detail, and particularly with great emphasis on the question of stability and certainty, and also state practice. State practice is key. This is an opportunity for this region to start looking at state practice and for stability and certainty. I know the Pacific Island Forum, the Pacific Island states have been very proactive on this and declaring fixed boundaries, and declaring a view in favor of fixed boundaries. And there certainly seems to be a trend amongst many states in favor of this for obvious reasons, but we need to be able to make that very clear. Anyway, I thank you very much. Teddy Makasi. And so I look forward to the questions. And again, thank you so much. This is such an important issue, and I hope we continue this dialogue. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Niloufar Oral. And dear attendees, ladies and gentlemen, we just have already had the interesting lectures from the 2 distinguished speakers. And now let's move to the next sessions, as we have already had 17 questions from the Q&A boxes. Then we have also many questions to come from the YouTube. And we have approximately 30 minutes to discuss further on, and thoroughly exploring the matters that have been presented just now. And actually, we have 2 kinds of questions and answers. Okay. You can either type your questions again, or you can post the question live to the speakers, and later on, I will give you the opportunity for this by clicking the hand raising on the above part of this Zoom. And for the first question, yeah, there are many questions. And the first question is from Firdaus Agung, yeah, directed to, I believe it's for Pak Hafaz. If the baseline point is eroded, which one will be used as reference? The recorded baseline point or the new baseline point that need to be established? Or perhaps Dr. Niloufar can answer this. And question number 2, how soon the effect of losing of baseline point take effect on international relations? Immediately, or take some time until everybody is aware of it? And can we establish new man-made base point as replacement? Okay, this is going to be the first questions. Will you please answer it directly, or should we go to the next question, Your Excellency?
You can collect more because they can.
Okay. 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 All right. And second question for Dr. Niloufar. As mentioned earlier, ILC now discussing the possible legal solution towards impact of SLR on the maritime boundaries. what is the tendency of the solutions? Are experts and states agreed to apply a fixed baseline or fixed outer limits? Or is there any objections towards the solution from the landlocked states? Another questions to Mr. Hafaz and Dr. Nilofer. The question is, okay, is that, okay, specific questions regarding this issue. The question is, does sea level rise and its impact can be categorized as a fundamental change of circumstances as stated in Article 62 of VCLT? If so, can it be used by the parties to withdraw themselves from a treaty? Then another question from Igusti Putu Agung. I don't know, he or she has a question regarding the rise of sea levels. We know that the rise of sea level might change our current coastline. Regarding the change, will it affect the length of our sea zone, since it will also change the baseline used to measure the length of the zone as defined by UNCLOS? And which one that will be used by, that will be used, is it the baseline before the sea rise or after the sea rise? Another questions from the Q&A box. How can the threat of sea level rise aggression be a threat to national sovereignty and maritime security? Question number 2, how does the international laws see the problem of the threat of sea level rise or aggression that causes the loss of the outermost island area, which is a determining factor in the country's territorial territory, especially Indonesia, and how mitigation efforts can be done by Indonesia or international relations and domestic policy? Will there be another questions, Your Excellency or Dr. Nilofer?
That should be enough to discuss first, yeah.
Okay, maybe we can go at it first, then we go on to the question and answer. Okay, maybe perhaps you can answer this first, then if there is enough time for this, we can continue to another questions. Okay.
My take, I believe, currently you have two legal thinkings. The first one is that the baseline is ambulatory, and the other thinking would be fixed. I myself, personally, I would want to go for the fixed approach, which is permanency. It is very important for legal certainty, and but this requires a certain aspect of the state itself. You need to have a proper submission process to the UN on your charts of base points and also baseline, either normal baseline or straight baseline or archipelagic baseline. But also importantly, you have to have a baseline that is in line with the conventional law of the sea, because frankly speaking, there are certain parties who have a very long straight baseline, which is, I believe, not in line with the conventional law of the sea. So the issue of permanency is very important. Of course, this is still in the debate at the international law communities, and that's why you have the ILC still discussing this particular subject. But I would prefer for the permanency itself. Now, building a base point on artificial features or object, it's possible under conventional law of the sea. You can use, for instance, the end of ports or port works or port stats, but there are specific requirements that need to be fulfilled by countries to be able to use artificial features as a base point in the country. So, and it's quite rigid, and it's subject to a lot of detailed assessment on that. So yes, it's possible, and that's why permanency is very important. Now, the questions on whether this has been known by international community, whether this will impact international relation, it's already impacting international relation. It's already impacting the position of countries. The small island developing countries, they have already established a grouping in the UN that specifically discuss on this particular issue, especially on the issue of statehood, and also the specific issue of the legal rights, political rights, the human rights of people in the populations that are affected by the rising of sea level. So that's my take. Please.
Okay, for Dr. Nilofer, perhaps you can answer the questions.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for those questions. I see that there were a couple that had to do with the change of circumstances or rebus sic stantibus and the Vienna Convention. Well, the Vienna Convention expressly excludes land boundary treaties. So it cannot be applied, I mean, not land, but boundary treaties. And it doesn't say land or whatever, but the understanding is, of course, the question is, well, does that apply to maritime boundaries? And the writing, the ILA has looked at it. I think everyone is pretty well of the view, and I cited 2 cases in the most recent one, arbitration award, where it would not apply. So I think it's not going to apply to maritime boundaries, and that's important. Again, international relations gives a great deal of importance to stability and security, and that is why land boundaries are sacrosanct, as we should think of as maritime boundaries as well. But there are some questions that arise because of these provisions in the convention. So that is why it's very important. I think Ambassador Havas has made his view known, that states need to be able to express very clearly that if they take the view of permanency. But of course, these are boundaries that have been determined in accordance with international law, right? And they have to have been recognized. There's no question that maritime boundaries is one of the more contentious questions, not easy. And that's the other thing. It takes years to finalize these treaties. Indonesia, my goodness, you have such experience. And to think that all these years of negotiations, political goodwill, efforts should change because of what is not even quite a natural phenomenon, to be quite honest, we have to keep this in mind. We're talking about anthropogenic sea level rise. And that's, but I don't want to get into that issue. So fundamental change of circumstance, no. Now, the work of the commission on this. So it is interesting because I speak on my personal name. I'm not speaking on behalf of the commission or the study group, because again, it's not quite out yet, the report. But there are states, of course, are concerned, rightly so, that not to change the law of the Sea Convention, right? So they don't want the commission making recommendations to introduce something new to the convention. And certainly that's not the role of the commission or what we're thinking. On the other hand, a very important part of the work of the commission is the progressive development of international law and its codification, which includes looking at state practice. State practice is very important. And so we see possible emerging state practice on this. But what is very clear is that many, many states have voiced support for stability and security and boundaries. And I think that's important. So, but there's more work to be done. And the commission, this is going to be an ongoing process. The statehood issue, of course, and I know that wasn't asked, but that's a very complicated issue, but it's a real one. We know that there are some island states that will disappear. And then what happens? There are principles such as land dominates the sea principles. What does that mean? Do we have to think of new principles? For example, I think of, and this is again just me speaking, once an island, always an island. So anyway, so those are very good questions. I appreciate them. And I may have missed some, but I think the question of on the artificial points, one important question too. Is there a point where an island that's naturally formed becomes so constructed, and I'm not getting into issues concerning South China Sea, but really in terms of adaptation, that it becomes artificial? These are other questions we have to ask as well. So anyway, so thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you. And then we go on to the next question. This is from YouTube. Question via YouTube, Philippus Cristanto. Good afternoon. I'd like to address a question to Ambassador Havas. As an archipelagic state, how do we strengthen our environmental ocean diplomacy? How can Indonesia play its central role in this issue? And another question from Yurido Agni Kusuma. I'm Rido. I have a question for Pak Arief. Indonesia has experienced a lot of sea level rise. What is the right solution to maintain Indonesia's maritime boundaries? Thanks. And a question from YouTube again, from Teguh Sulistian. Sea level rise has a different period and different value of rising for each region. Then how long does it take to periodically review the position of the base point? Maybe perhaps it can be answered by two speakers. And there is another question from Anonymous. It is not, there is no name in here. Is there any continuous program from international organization to give underdeveloped countries to upskilling their knowledge and technologies to do the blue economy, especially for the fishermen who can afford any high technology? And question from Yusran Adrian Nisar. He has two questions. How far the common but differentiated responsibility can be implemented pursuant to the perspective of state liability to environmental problem, especially in climate issue? And question number two, how far is the power of Paris Agreement can bind the countries, and taking into account the US action in pulling itself out of Paris Agreement? Okay, and it seems like there is another question, but out of topics. Okay, then another question from Nelly Laura, Universitas Pertamina. The honorable presenters and all the audience, good afternoon. I want to ask questions related to our territorial issue with 10 countries. As we know, we only resolve territorial issue with Singapore. Refer to UN clause, what strategies should be taken by Indonesia to solve this territorial dispute? I believe diplomacy itself not enough to solve this problem, and so far there is no update about these issues. Climate change issue make an impact to maritime boundaries in Asia Pacific, including Indonesia. What strategies should be taken by Indonesia as the biggest archipelagic state in the world to defend our sovereignty and domain maritime? Thank you. And finally, for His Excellency Havas Ugroseno, the legal problem related to boundaries around small islands or outer island in particular countries are the authority, excuse me, it's Jam, where is it? Okay, okay. Well, where does it go? My question regarding to the biggest challenge we face, is it possible for us to do a water pumping like Netherlands do over time as a way to maintain their lands and also to control flood? And another question from YouTube Live. Interest to explore in coastal resources include coral ecosystem will influence sea rise level. Please give your opinion. And another question from Pusparida. is there any international protection for the indigenous community to the possible losing of traditional land? Yeah. Yeah. And another question from Andrea Wibowo. My question regarding to the topic is, how does the law continually adapt to the continuous rise of sea level caused by climate change? And I believe it is for Dr. Niloufar. Yeah. Okay, that's all the question we have so far. Yeah. Wants
Okay.
to be...
I'll try to put it in the context. The majority of the question, I think, relates to environmental law. I would say that if Indonesia wants to play a role in the ocean diplomacy or environmental ocean diplomacy, what we can do is we start from Indonesia itself. That's the most important aspect, because we cannot lead without giving example. Okay, so I'll give you a very clear examples. Okay, Paris Agreement does not have very clear directions on the oceans. The Paris Agreement only mentioned ocean just one word in the preamble. Paris Agreement does not say anything about ocean in the operative paragraph. But what Indonesia can do is to add in the nationally determined commitments, our own commitments, the ocean aspects of the Paris Agreement. So we can do it ourselves. We can embed in our reports on the impact of climate change toward our oceans, our coastal area, and I think that would be a very important aspect in starting Indonesian leadership on this particular issue. Then we can go with the like-minded countries at the level of think tank, expert, as well as states, in trying to influence the ocean into the Paris Agreement discussions. I believe so far we have been quite successful. We have already ocean issue discussed in the Paris Agreement discussion. It's not yet an agenda. I think it's in the agenda of other matters, but the discussions with different countries, we want to have what we call the blue COP. So the blue COP. So the COP that is blue, COP that looks after the ocean, which is 2/3 of our planet Earth. So this is one aspect. Another aspect is the idea of common interest with the countries that have same challenges and same situations in terms of the climate change. That's why Indonesia and UNDP and Fiji and other leading countries in the Pacific, we launched this idea of having the Archipelagic and Island States Forum. So this is actually an innovation of many different countries that have the same challenges with regard to the ocean situations today. So this, I think, is a very important aspect as well in the context of addressing the climate change and playing important role and leaderships of environmental ocean diplomacy. There are other examples that I can go on, but I understand that many of you listeners and viewers are teachers and students from various universities. There is one thing that I would like to ask from you, which is, why don't you create an ocean cluster in your university? Not many universities have an ocean clusters, even though they have the faculty of fisheries, the technical faculty on shipbuilding, the economic faculties on the coastal economy. But sometimes even in one university, you don't have a discussion among yourselves on the ocean issue. The idea, I think, is for each university, you have your own ocean cluster And then your ocean cluster would speak to other ocean cluster of different universities in Indonesia. And then we can expand that to the region, and we can expand that to global level. So this would be also a leadership in the academic world in addressing the climate change issue. Now, the Netherlands is, in my personal point of view, is not a good example. You know why? Because half of the Netherlands is basically peatland, tanah gambut. Okay. Now, in Europe, peatlands are being drained, peatlands are being burned for the purpose of farming. Okay. We have done that since in the past, and we are rewetting our peatland. We have rewetted 200,000 hectares of peatland in Indonesia. And in Europe, peatland are continuously being drained. So when you drain the peatland, then the surface of the land goes down. And this is what's going to happen. So instead of pumping the water out, this should actually put water in the peatland. So then the surface will go up. So the idea of pumping out may not necessarily be a good idea for our coastal defense. Coral reef is one of the great way in coastal defenses. So that's why Indonesia also a leading country in the coral reef management. You know, the CTI, the Coral Reef Triangle Initiative in Manado. I believe this needs to be developed even further in the area where you have the rising of sea level. It takes a long time, but it's something that we can use these days. There is one particular NGO in Bali called the BioRock in the village of Pemutaran, and BioRock is using electricity to charge steel to grow faster coral reef. So this is something very interesting in terms of technology. So local government, I think, should also have a look at that aspect in terms of trying to adapt ourselves with the current situation in a much more sustainable and ecological way. I think with regard to the issue of territory from University of Pertamina, I think if you look at the zones where we are negotiating in terms of boundaries, yes, we have 10 neighboring partners in maritime boundaries, but not all of them we are negotiating the territorial waters. We only negotiate territorial waters where our area with that country is less than 24 nautical miles, because territorial water is 12 nautical miles. And that narrows down only with Malaysia in some parts, with Singapore, with PNG already done, with Timor-Leste, we are negotiating. That's it. So it's only 4 out of 10. With India, it's EEZ and continental shelf. With Thailand, the same. Malaysia, similar on the bigger part. With Vietnam, of course, it's far away, so it's only EEZ and continental shelf. The Philippines as well. Palau, especially. Palau is unique because the capital of Palau itself, it's probably 600 miles from the closest islands of Indonesia. But Palau has 2 small features, very small features, and smaller than the island of Ituaba under the arbitrations. So if you want to apply the arbitrations between the Philippines and the PRC on the South China Sea on the status of islands, I think the 2 small islands in the Pacific of Palau will be at the same status of those small islands in the South China Sea. With PNG, we have done that long time ago, lateral boundary. With Timor-Leste, it's ongoing. So I think it's important to see which particular maritime zones that we are discussing. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Your Excellency. Then Dr. Nilofer.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And I will answer. Well, one thing I want to follow up on the Paris Agreement, because I know there was a question on that and also on the adaptability of law to climate change. And if I can give a little history, the only reason that there is reference to the ocean in the Paris Agreement is because I personally proposed it and actually fought very hard for it with colleague from the Solomon Islands. And I can assure you that we tried to get it actually into the operative text. I won't go into the whole process of the Paris Agreement and the negotiations, but I do take particularly pride that at least we have that one word for the ocean to give us at least some recognition. But it raises an issue, and I've written on this as well. The problem with climate change in the ocean, it falls between two regimes. It's not that great. Here we have sea level rise, does come within at least the question of maritime boundaries, but there's nothing about climate change in the Law of the Sea Convention. We have the Paris Agreement, the UNFCCC as well. And there it talks about adaptation, which is very important. And I really take the view that we have to look more and more at law and international law as being a measure of adaptation. So states should probably think about that even when they're putting in their nationally determined contributions, NDCs. Why not put in that as well? Because that is a legitimate forum. There is and I think Ambassador Al-Habas, you should definitely be in the forefront of that blue movement in the Paris or in the climate change discussions. It's very important. And it's growing. The Blue COP, unfortunately, there were some problems, but that has to continue. And I think we also have to bring law into it as well, because it's directly because of climate change that a lot of, be it the archipelagic states, the small island states, low-lying coastal states, there are many issues that require legal responses. And we should not think of adaptation purely within seawalls, fortifications. You know, it has to be broader than that. So I would add that. And I know there's a question, and it's very important, about indigenous rights. The Law of the Sea Convention, of course, made certain, and an international law about traditional fishing rights. And even when we go to cases, the question of whether these fishing rights will be taken into account as special circumstances for adjustment of the median line. But I think as well, again, it's about traditional rights, cultural rights, all of these that are being threatened by climate change and sea level rise. And those need to be brought up in all the different fora. And so that is important, not just within the question of maritime boundaries, but beyond that. And there was one question about, are there programs for developing countries? Very important. Developing countries need to have the capacity, including the legal capacity to, and I know there are, and I'm happy to share that information later because this is very important. Even the IUCN, that I'm a member of, spends a great deal of time working with developing countries and building this type of capacity. So I will end there because I know we've come to the end of the time. There's so many questions, wonderful questions, but thank you so much for this opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, actually, the questions is coming in, but there is one question to answer by His Excellency Hafaz from Sasya Anindita, HBK Kemlu. What is your view of the impact of SLR towards the current maritime boundaries negotiation? Does Indonesia, in negotiating maritime boundaries, has already taken into account the SLR? And if so, what kind of policy that Indonesia has been taken or should be taken?
Well, if we look at the incidence of rising sea level in Indonesia today, I think the one that is most affected is in the northern part of Java. And this means that we don't have a base point that is being affected in terms of our maritime boundary so far. Okay, so this is the fact of today. but we have to be prepared ourselves if there are certain areas, especially in Sumatra Islands, because both sides of Sumatra has base point and baselines, or the site of relevant coast in the northern part of Sulawesi, for instance. This needs to be looked at very carefully, and the policy I believe that should be considered is to bring the local governments to ask them to report on the incidence of the rising sea level in that particular area, and also at the same time the Indonesian Hydrographic Authority under the Navy, as well as the National Agency for Geospatial, BIG, they also need to have a look this particular aspect in the future work, so that we can then make a very clear positionings on this particular issue. So far, we are quite okay because the incident relates more on the rights of the coastal populations in the northern part of Java, but we have to prepare ourselves in the future on the particular area that might be impacted in terms of the rising sea level and our base point and baseline. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, attendees, ladies and gentlemen, I'm so sorry to say that we are in the end of the session. And I'm very appreciate your coming on, Your Excellency, Dr. Arief Hafaz Ugroseno, to share your vast knowledge and rich experience in Indonesia's foreign policy and sovereignty boundaries. And thank you so much to Dr. Nilofer Oral, who has shared her deep knowledge on international ocean matters and international environmental matters in terms of international law. Thank you very much once again. And thank you so much for all attendees for your active participation in discussion session and during this webinar. Although there are many questions, but I hope that later on we can see again and can discuss again with these two remarkable speakers. And I hope this forum give you more insightful understanding, particularly on the sea level rise due to climate change impacts and the reason why we need to reserve our environment. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay, I have to say goodbye right now. Thank you very much.
See you soon, I hope.
Yeah. Bye-bye.
Ladies and gentlemen, I welcome all of you, the land of coconut tree, land of smiling people.
The main question is not about the total quantity. Our focus is to remain as a prime destination, high-end consumers. We got only 1,200 islands. You got 17,000. Can you imagine the potential of Indonesia for tourism industry if you plan something like what we have?
We have a program, we call it the Seribu Startup. Program is about to inspire them what to become the entrepreneur. When you are combine any ethnic people with the different background and with different local wisdom, and they are joined together, they can form a new innovation.
Indonesia diramalkan akan menjadi negara besar 4 atau 5 dunia dalam 2035-4045 dengan GDP kira-kira 12 triliun US dollar.
What is the one key problem that they have to solve it?
The biggest problem I see is the climate change. There's something you could do. From today on, stop using single-use plastic. It's the very highest contributor for pollution in the sea.
Jangan suka buang sampah, apalagi sampah plastik. Kalau mikroplastik itu dimakan ikan dimakan oleh manusia yang masih bisa melahirkan, hampir pasti bayinya ibu itu cacat atau stunting. Ayo kita kerjasama, kita bangun Indonesia, kita punya presiden seperti Joko Widodo yang bekerja dengan hati, dia hanya memikirkan apa yang terbaik buat Indonesia.
The world is starting to wake up that we have long known, that without our precious environment, none of us have a future.